Well, hello, everybody. It is your favorite day of the week. It is time for another episode of the Reality Reading Rainbow, where I talk about books written by reality stars, especially those from Bravo, and try to make sense of them. I also do interviews. I am Les Kirkendall Barrett, and today's an interview day. My friend, who I'm going to introduce in a second, and I are talking about the book written by Shep Rose, Average Expectations. And my friend who I'm going to be discussing this with is my friend Semaj from the podcast Semaj Gets Cancelled. How are you? Welcome.
Hello. It is such an honor and a privilege to be back in the Reality Reading Rainbow offices. So happy to be here. And that's my alarm telling me to be on time for this meeting. I'm so excited. I actually read Shep's book back in March when it came out, so to revisit again was very, very interesting.
And the thing is, I definitely have opinions, and so I'm really curious to hear your opinions on this. But okay, you know what? Let's get started. What did you think?
So I really liked the book. I read it in his voice as if he was reading it to me, and it really kind of helped carve out that picture of him, because he's always said on the show or presented to be like this, kind of worldly travel culture guy. And people can say that, going to a new bar in every city may not make everyone as cultured as they think they are and talking to people, but Shep is actually that guy. He's been to Costa Rica, he's been to Rome, he's been to Buenos Aires, he's been to Dubai, he's been to South America, he's been to Germany. He's truly that girl. He's been all over this world. Hong Kong.
Yeah, well, and it's so funny that you said that you read it in his voice, because I actually listened to it on Audible because my days these days are so busy that I need to have the books on Audible so that I can listen while I'm driving the car, when I'm running errands, when I'm, and it's just easier for me to do it that way. So I heard it in his voice. And so my relationship with this book is kind of weird.
Okay.
And let me explain. So I'd be listening to a chapter, he'd be describing something, I would be like, oh God, yeah, whatever. That sounds really hokey. And then he would say something cool. And then he would say something really good. Yeah. And so it literally, I'm not going to use the word hate, because I was going to say it was a love-hate.
Yeah.
I was going to say it was a love-hate, but I don't want to use the word hate because I didn't dislike the book.
Right.
And almost every time he said something that I thought was corny or hokey, he would then kind of win me over. So I'm having a weird relationship with this book.
Your relationship with Shep is definitely a journey. And you know what? I think that's the charm. That's the Southern charm of it all. So I think, that is Shep. So you like him one minute, you hate him the next, but at the end of the day, there's something good in there.
Yeah, I mean, and what I found interesting is, I liked his the breakdown, his family tree. I thought that was very interesting, especially when he talked about his aunt, who may have been the inspiration for the character Jordan Baker in The Great Gatsby. I thought that was cool. I liked his stories about his background, the one, was it his uncle that brought an elephant to town to help them? One of his ancestors brought an elephant to town.
Great grandfather, I think.
Yeah. So that actually was interesting. And another thing that I got from the book is I was actually surprised how humble his family is and his parents. Mm-hmm. Because when he talked about stuff like how they never had new cars, they always drove hand-me-down cars.
No new clothes.
right? Even though they had money, they basically lived fairly modest lives for the most part.
Only
I
splurged on
definitely,
travel.
yeah. I thought that was interesting too. What was your take on that?
I loved it. And another thing about the book as a whole is that we really get to see Shep as a writer. Again, on the show, you know, he'll joke like, you know, how he's a writer, he's always quoting a poet or somebody, but like we really get his writing style and his voice. And what I want from him next is to start his own historical fiction series about his ancestors. I think he can make a very nice historical fiction novel about them.
Now, you've met him before, right?
Yes, virtually
What
on
was your
this
experience
book
with
tour
him?
he did. So I went to all three of his book tours just to feel something, just to feel alive. Felt it in my wallet, felt it on Zoom, and he was himself. He portrayed exactly on camera as he does off camera, and like you know, he just said he's always loved writing. He's always wanted to write a book and be a writer, and he thinks maybe next he'll write a book of essays about you know more stories about the travels, which we learned about in chapter 7. And he just seems like a regular guy. He doesn't seem like he's been changed by fame. It's like Shep is still Shep, and I like that about him. And I asked him very quickly. I'm like, hey, sorry to put you on the spot. You don't have to answer this, or you don't have to say yes, but like you know, I've came to all three of your book tours virtually, and I would love to know if we could you know, record for my podcast. He's like, sure, no problem. And thank you for buying 3 books. So yeah, he's like very cool. Like
Well, that's good.
he's not, you know, he's not up here. Shep is cool. And he has
And
a
that
brain.
was and for the most part, that was the vibe that I got, was that, you know, that he was definitely more humble than I thought that he would be.
Yes.
Now, so one of the issues that I did have is in the chapter when he was talking about his boarding school experience and how he set it up like, I was kicked out of this boarding school, and he really set it up well. Like I was ready for this, you know, this just crazy story about how, you know, I banged a bunch of hookers in my dorm or something like that.
Yeah.
And he really set it up well. But then when it came time for the payoff, it was kind of like, wah, wah, like I was like, is that it?
I like that though, because to his credit, it shows again, he's really just a regular guy who happens to be in a not so regular situation. I like that it was kind of anticlimactic in that way. And I like that like he was like, you know, not afraid to say he was upset about it and like, you know, show like his anger and like not try to like bottle it up and like whatever, it's fine. Like he's very expressive, and I really appreciate that. It just adds to the authenticity of it all.
Now, another thing that like surprised me too was when he gave the list of his jobs.
On the resume, put his whole resume out there. That was crazy. I love that.
So I was like, you know, so what was he was like a busboy,
right? At the restaurant,
he had to deliver
a pizza shop.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then he interned with one of his dad's like finance friends for a while, and then like he didn't work, and then came the show.
But then I like too that he stressed that his mother was like, no, you're gonna get a job, like when he was a kid. So he started working when he was like 14, 15, something crazy like that.
At the country club,
And so I thought that was kind of cool that his mom's like, no, you're not sitting around the house all day. You're gonna get a job and you're gonna work. So that was, you know, that was interesting, because I definitely went in there with the preconceived notion of what I was gonna get.
Right.
And so I really was surprised in some ways. What was something else? So you know what? I asked you to cover 5, 6, and 7. So what did you get out of those chapters?
Okay, so chapter 5, I gleaned a few notes from that. So one, this is like a fun fact, I guess, if you will. I learned that Bill Murray is part owner of Charleston's minor league baseball team, the River Dogs. Did not know that before reading that chapter. I learned that he's also one of Shep's favorite people, and he got to meet him for the first time at Danny McBride's finale party for her show Vice Principals. And when he asked him for a photo, he declined. He said that humbled him. Being told no for a picture kind of brought him back to reality, which he said he needed at the time. So I really enjoyed that. And then also from chapter 5, he said he's friends with everyone on the cast. And when he gets bored, he'll start a fight with Craig just because. Doesn't suffer fools gladly, but loves foolishness.
Now, and the only thing that I got from that is, you know, I'm like, come on, Bill Murray, you know, take a picture.
I mean, he's Bill Murray. I get it, you know?
And I've heard stories before of people like approaching Bill Murray and him not being so nice. I've heard that.
Yeah, well, you know, not everyone gets it, you know. It always takes me back to what Ed Sheeran says when it comes to, you know, meeting fans. And he's like, it's going to take you less time to take the picture, but it takes you more time to stop and say no. So just take the picture. Right.
Oh, another thing that I got from the beginning, which I forgot to mention, is Shep is very accident prone.
Yes, very clumsy, tall, lanky, clumsy man.
Like he broke a bunch of bones. He had teeth knocked out. And then he said, didn't he say his teeth from the beginning never grew in right?
Yeah, because as a kid, he ate cement and it messed up his molars.
So he went down like the list of his injuries, and it was like a very extensive.
Drove his mother nuts. The poor woman. Never a dull day in the Rose household. So, you know.
No. What was some of the things that you got out of the chapters that you read?
Sure. So, let's see. It says assholes can be charismatic. He gave us a list. So in the book, he gives a lot of lists. One of the lists was like, you know, his favorite movies and favorite actors. And the one that struck me out of that list was Martin Kove, who played John Creasy in the Cobra Kai movie. And he said he made the Martin Kove fan page, like website. Like, he's like, I made one of the original fan pages. And he's like, it never went anywhere, but, you know, I loved him so much, I had to make a fan page. So I found that very interesting. And then from chapter 6, he tries to give us his view of, like, you know, men in the world. He said, you're either a Jeff Bridges or Leonardo DiCaprio. And he's like, if you're a Jeff Bridges, you're like a normal guy, you know, you get it. Yeah, you got like, you know, this cool job and like, you know, you're famous and people know you. He's like, but you know, Jeff is still a regular guy. He's like, one of my best friends married his daughter and went to the wedding, and like, you know, it was very casual and normal, nothing crazy. He's like, and then you can be a Leonardo DiCaprio and, you know, like, you know, you travel the world, you know, you sleep with a bunch of women, you don't settle down. And then he's like, you know, I think the difference between those two guys is that, you know, the ones who kind of settle down quick, get married, they, you know, probably fare off better in the end because they got some stability, consistency. And then he compared them to athletes, saying like, you know, the ones who are married, you know, like they have like the better careers, they had more time to focus on their craft, and the ones who are maybe not so, you know, stable in that way, not tied down. He said, like, you know, their careers weren't as long. Maybe their best days weren't as good as they could have been, things like that. And then he says, maybe there's a third guy, which is the George Clooney type or Derek Jeter, Warren Beatty. He's like, you know, the only difference between those guys and me is that they have talent. He's like, take away the talent. He's like, take away their talent and their good looks, and you got me. So I love that he's putting himself on the same level with George Clooney and Warren Beatty. I find that hilarious.
Well, and throughout the book, he keeps on going back to the fact that, like, hey, you know, I'm on a reality show. I'm not curing cancer. You know, hey, I'm on a reality show. I'm not like I'm not doing anything spectacular. I'm on this show.
Right.
So I liked that he kept on touching on that, because I've read so many of these books where these people are like, you know, I am on this show and my shit don't stink, you know? Right. So I liked that he was like, yeah, I'm on the show.
But that's not my whole story
for doing this.
Yeah.
But it's not my whole story. And just because I'm on this show doesn't mean that I'm like the next, you know, Al Pacino.
Yeah. You know, very different from that route of, you know, one Mr. Jax Taylor, who now thinks he's a director after, you know, just happened to be on set with Randall for like one project. So it's nice to see.
Wait. Now, okay, I have a question about that. Okay, so because I see that on Insta, what did he actually direct? And student films don't count.
Right. So I don't think he directed anything. I think this is more so Randall just like kind of like stroking his ego and like letting him like sit in the chair, take the picture. You know how like, you know, when it's a kid's birthday party, you know, you give them a little hat and you give them the cake and then the kid's happy for the day. I think that's what that is. Because obviously Jax doesn't have any type of skills or talent. So I doubt Randall, who's already losing money, is gonna sink his ship forever by letting Jax direct anything with no classical training or skills.
Right. And you know, I mean, and if it's just a case of going on set and sitting in a chair and getting a selfie taken, then I've like directed some award-winning films.
Amazing. Do you want to share your resume with the class then? Because I too have done it.
Right. If that's the case, there was this movie. My boyfriend at the time was one of the producers of this movie called Thank You for Smoking. So I went on the set quite a few times and like hung out. So if that counts as directing, I was nominated for a Golden Globe. There you go.
Love that for you. Congrats. I cannot wait for your next project.
Oh, it was nothing. It was nothing.
Great project. I mean, come on. Like, what's next, Les?
Well, you know, I'll be working with Meryl Streep.
Ooh, love that for you. Love that journey.
Yeah, you know, sitting in that chair is hard work. I tell you.
I believe it. Now I have a question for you. So also in chapter 6, Shep says in 50 years, he predicts that marriage will be, as we know it, unrecognizable. What do you feel about that as being a married person yourself? How do you feel about that statement?
I actually agree. I mean, you know, the concept of marriage has changed anyway because, you know, now that there's gay marriage, which is how I got to get married, it's definitely different than even like, I would say like 10 or 15 years ago, you know. Sure. I remember being younger, like when I was in my 20s, marriage was not an option.
Right.
It wasn't even on the table. Like it wasn't even on the table. Like it wasn't even an option to be an option. So in my lifetime, marriage has already changed and it is unrecognizable, you know, because now that it's legal pretty much for the most part, it's legal all over the world except for a few countries now, right?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah. So that is definitely, you know, a sign that marriage is changing. So I agree with that, especially in 50. I actually, and I'll go one step further.
Yeah.
I have more straight friends who are now choosing not like they have their committed relationships,
right?
But they're choosing not to get married.
Smart. Love that for them.
And so I know more gay people now getting married than straight people. And so I think part of the reason for that is since we were denied for so long, that now that we could do it, we're like, well, fuck it, we're going to do it. We fought option for this.
Right.
Might as well use the option, utilize it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And I found that whole little blurb he did interesting because as we know famously from the show, he can't seem like, you know, hold down a relationship or there's always something else he's looking at or something else he's doing or, you know, the girl says he won't grow up, whatever the case is. So to hear him like kind of give that statistic and then also break down or give us his analysis of his parents' relationship, saying he's never seen them fight except one time and he was like involved in it, you know, when they were traveling in Paris and like his dad's like, all right, I 10 by 10, breakfast at 8, you know, train at 10, yada yada. He's like, no, I'm not gonna do that. It's our last day in Paris. We're gonna walk around. He's like, that's the one fight he's ever seen them in. He thinks they have like the best relationship and he wants that. He thinks it's possible. But as we've seen it over the last 7 years on TV, he hasn't quite got that yet. So I found that interesting to give us that stat.
Now, what is your opinion on this? In your opinion, why don't you think that he is maintaining a long-term relationship? And the reason I'm bringing it up is for the most part, he doesn't see, like, he seems like if he, he seems like in a relationship, like he wouldn't be a jerk,
right?
Like he seems like he'd be all right. Like nobody's perfect, but he doesn't seem like he'd be like an asshole in a relationship either.
I think it's a few things. So one, maybe a little bit of Peter Pan syndrome, and then two, like myself, don't tell me what to do. So I think the second someone tries to tell him what to do or suggest what to do, or we'll say, hey, why don't you like once we hear those words, it's like, nope, done, shut down, cut it out, leave me alone, I'm out of here. And I think all those things together results in his relationships, like he says, lasting maybe 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year. Because, I think he doesn't want to be tied down by anything or anyone, literally, metaphorically. Like, I think he wants to always be in control of his situation as much as he can. That's just my
And then again, I mean, and Semaj, so you said, like, he's like you. How old are you now?
I just turned 26.
Okay. So here's the deal, Semaj.
Yes.
And I'm talking from experience.
Lay it on me, baby.
So I honestly think, like, I was in the long-term relationship that was like for almost 30 years. I'm sorry, not 30, 13 years.
Wow.
It felt like 30. It was only 13.
Right. Well, but when you do the crime, you got to do the time.
Right. I met him at 38.
Okay.
And then I met my current husband and we got married when I was 50.
Wow.
So my first legal marriage was at 50. And I think that one should not get married until their 40s or 50s.
I love that. And I love in general that, like, that age range, 40, 50, 60, they're getting like, a new rep. Because, for years, everyone's like, oh, 40 old, 50 old, life is over. But thanks to shows like Roni, people like Vicky, Orange County, all these older women, Shannon, basically starting their life all over again at that age. It's so inspiring to see. So I love seeing that and then hearing from real people like you, like, yeah, like, no, life really, really is kind of starting at that point. So something to look forward to for sure.
And so, it's like my 20s were nuts. I enjoyed the hell out of my 20s.
Right.
I enjoyed the hell out of my 30s. And then it was kind of like, I think it's time to, grow up a little bit.
Switch it up a little bit, yeah.
A little. I'm not grown up, but a little. But looking back, I'm kind of glad that it worked out that way.
Sure.
That I had a chance to really like enjoy my 20s and my 30s and really enjoy my life. And, when I got married, finally, it was like on my terms.
Good.
And now, like, I'm ready to settle down like a tiny bit. So how old is Shep? He's what? Like,
I think he's 40, 43, 44, somewhere around there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that he did it the right way.
Yeah, because he also lived it up in his 20s and 30s. And I think he's going on, if not 1 year, maybe 2 years with the current girlfriend, Taylor. So, he's definitely adjusting. I think he's, like he says in the book, he's looking to, settle down a little bit, switch it up, try new things. And he says that he's just having a really good time with Taylor and he's just taking it, day by day.
Now, was there anything, and this could be anything throughout the book, was there anything that you read in this book that you did not agree with him on?
Maybe the fact that he would go to all these countries and like just couldn't learn the language. Like he says, like, I have a bad ear. We're learning a language requires you to be like not self-conscious. He's like, so I can never learn, Spanish. He's like, I went to Buenos Aires, I went to Costa Rica, I went to Brazil, can never pick up Spanish. He's like, but sometimes if I get too drunk, I'll start speaking Spanish at the bar. So that just like, literally did not make sense to me. I'm like, how does this? Sure, fine, okay, claro, right? But and I like how he'll say like, I'll cry at movies And the movies are like the most like cliche, I'm gonna cry at this movie, like, you know, Marley and Me, Terms of Endearment, you know, City of God, Weekend at Bernie's. So it's like, it's interesting how these are the things that make him cry. But Notebook, and he said he watched the first to like get girls, and like he ends up, you know, having to be consoled on the couch by that girl for half an hour only to be sent home.
Right.
So while, you know, at first it didn't make sense, looking back at it now, reading it again, it's like, you know what? This is just the makeup of him. And something that's currently kind of not bothering me, but like, you know, I feel like it's weird when people maybe mention this in conversation. So you know how like we have all these people in our lives, these housewives, these reality stars, whatever, and we really don't like them, or, you know, we feel a certain way about them. I feel like now I'm seeing a lot of people using, maybe not as an excuse or more like an explanation. Well, if you met them in person, you would feel differently, X, Y, and Z. Or like, you know, if you had a conversation with them, you would see this side of him. And sometimes I'm like, but do I need to? Like, I understand this is a TV show. I'm watching a show. I realize I'm probably not going to meet them or interact with them. So why do I need to hear, or why do you feel the need to tell me, well, if they're not like this in real life? I feel like now it's like the new but and in this realm. So
right.
When he says in his book, you know, if you think I'm an a-hole, you're probably right. He's like, but you know, if you sat down and had a cup of coffee with me, I'm sure I could change your mind. Like, for some reason, that thinking and that sentiment is kind of rubbing me the wrong way lately. Especially like people are using it with Leah. Like someone said on a podcast, oh, you know, everyone's being so hard on her right now. I don't understand. And you know, if you all just sat down with her and had a drink with her, I think you'd feel really differently. I'm like, I don't need these explanations. So hearing him do that in that current space is like, would I? And I did, but the thing was, I already liked him, so I didn't need him to like disclaim himself to me.
And that's the cool thing in your experience, because at least you're like, well, I did meet him, right? I did talk to him, and I did like him.
I did. So it's weird, right? It's so weird. I'm constantly having that conversation with our good friend Taria. Like, we're always thinking like, do we need a justification for your behavior? Do we need to know that you're not like this when you're not at your job? Unclear.
Well, I mean, and you know that. Did you ever watch the TV show The Real World?
Yes, as a child, I was too young to be watching it, but I loved it.
Well, but like the season 1 of The Real World, where Heather, who was in season 1 of The Real World, someone was complaining about how they were edited, and Heather was like, they use what you give them. So if you're edited in a way to look like a jerk, that means that you had the jerky behavior for them to edit that down. Right. You're being a jerk.
Right. And I agree with that to a point. I used to always feel that way, but then, you know, what was it, last season? No, it was either season 14 or 13 of Orange County. That conversation with Tamara in the car. Tamara was like, I never said those words. We had like, you know, just copied and pasted my audio and like just showed the car moving. So I'm like, yeah, you said it, but then also it's like, wait, she actually wasn't in that car. So sometimes I question all the validity, but you're right. Most of the time it is like, they can't show this if you didn't at some point in some way do it.
And like, you know Dr. Monica, right?
Love, yes.
Yeah, I had her on the show last week, and I also know her from Clubhouse.
Yes.
And by the way, you guys, if you're listening and you have not joined Clubhouse, you need to join Clubhouse, and you need to join Club Bravo. But in this talk, one of the things that she actually made me think about is, she's like, well, you know, they have hours upon hours upon hours upon hours of tape that they have to cut down into an hour-long show.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff that you don't see. Like, she talked about like people who, you know, she had discussions with or experiences that she had where like they might not have shown her complete side of it. Or, you know,
right.
But at the same token, so I do think of it in terms of, okay, so there's so much that we don't get to see, and there's so much on the cutting room floor. Right. But at the same time, you still give them the jerky behavior.
Right. Like in some way, somewhere in there, this is still some piece of you, if not all of you.
Right.
They just happen to trim the fat. Yeah. They just trim all the fat for you. So yeah, it's weird.
And yeah, And so, yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Dr. Monica was on Camp Getaway.
Yes.
And so it was interesting to talk to her, not only to talk to someone who has the full-on reality show Bravo experience. It was also interesting to talk to a Black person who was in an all-white cast.
And also a psychologist too. Like a trained professional. So you've got all those things. So I always love hearing from Dr. Monica because her perspective is very, very unique. So I love that. Also love. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. No,
I also really love the title of chapter 7, The Ugly American, because I am constantly referring to myself as an ugly American. Like anytime I speak to someone from like a different country, I'm like, wow. Every time I speak to someone from a different country, I'm like, we are really losing over here, huh? Like anytime I speak to anyone who's not from America, I'm like, what are we doing over here? I just always get like a sense of pause. I'm like, wow, we really are dumb Americans. Like America is really losing out here in these streets. But
you're not the ugly American.
I don't know, because when I read this chapter, I'm like, I've done some of these things. Not like too fond about
like
this.
So, like what?
So wow. So this probably is the day I do get canceled. Sorry, readers, but you know how Shep says in the beginning of the Ugly American chapter, when his house became like the foreign exchange student hub because his family was enrolled in a local Rotary Club. So anytime they had like, you know, someone from another country who needs to come to American high school, they would stay at Shep's house. And Shep said his little brother one time would like, you know, like yell at this guy Bruno, thinking he was like deaf, but not realizing he couldn't understand English. So he would talk like, hello, blah, 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 like that kind of way. And like, I've caught myself doing that a time or two to people who maybe didn't speak English or didn't understand, or if I didn't speak their language, I would kind of give that kind of loud, slow talk. I'm like, that's not the best. It's not the best thing to do.
That's not, because see, when I think of the ugly American, because I grew up overseas, so I think Germany, of the ugly American, and Spain and Germany, but when I think of the ugly American, I think of the person that goes to a different country and won't try the food and won't, like, you know,
interact and engage.
Well, yeah, exactly. Or, you know, they're like, well, I don't know why you do this way because we're in America, we do it, blah, blah, blah. When it's like, you're not in America. So that's what I look at. That's what I look at as the ugly American.
Okay. I like that a little better.
Yeah. So you're not ugly. You didn't do anything ugly.
Okay, good. You know what? At this point, I'm always like, I'm like, should I save it? Should I do that? Because, you know, someone is like always waiting in the comments like, oh, what did you say? Sorry, you can't save it. You can't do that. So like, I'm like always like, should I be doing this?
Okay. So speaking of canceled, and this ties into the part that I didn't necessarily agree with. And because he did a whole chapter on cancel culture.
Sure did.
And what I didn't agree with is he broke down the concept of cancel culture he broke it down. And he made it a point to really explain the meaning of it. But then he made it sound like, oh, these poor people, they just made a mistake. When a lot of times people get canceled for saying serious shit. Or racist shit.
Yeah.
Right. And so he made it look like the people that get canceled are like these innocent victims who made a little mistake and everyone's just mean and piling on them. And what I didn't like as well is I believe there's a difference between being canceled and being trolled. Those are in my opinion, those are two different things. What do you think?
No, I agree. And I think he also said like at some point in that chapter, he's like, within reason, people should, be held accountable and people should X, Y, and Z. Like, I think he made the point, like, if you got a tweet from 10 years ago, should we really be holding you accountable for that today? He's like, and I think he said, like, can you be the same person? Sure you can, but also, can you have changed? Absolutely. And he's like, look at me, I've changed. I'm not the same person today that I am 10 years ago. So I think he did somewhat in a way like a fair job of kind of giving like that full picture view. And then funny enough, I asked him about it on my show, and I said, I'm like, well, you can't cancel a person, you can kind of like remove them. He's like, yes you can. And he gives the example of like a black woman who I think who was the head of Uber or like Pepsi or something, and he said that she had a tweet from like years ago that was like Islamophobic or something of that nature, and he said she apologized for it, she like told the company about it, and she said because like enough people tweeted the company, they like fired her. So to him, to in his mind, he's like, that's like a cancellation.
Well, and we have like an example that just happened the past few days. Are you familiar with Ellie Kemper from Kimmy Schmidt? Are you familiar with that whole?
So I've heard about it, but I haven't read it, so I don't know what it is. I'm aware something's happening with her.
So she was involved with this group, and they had they would have like debutante balls and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it turned out like the group had been around since the 1800s, and it was associated with white supremacy.
As most things from the 1800s are.
Right. But still today, it's still it's still associated. Okay. Yeah. And so she went to a debutante ball when she was a when she was a teenager.
Right.
So what she did is she didn't try to explain it away.
Good.
She didn't make any excuses. She got on Twitter and said, I realize that this is wrong, and I should have been better informed. And she just basically, she owned it.
Right.
And she's like, I'm not a white supremacist, but at the time I was younger.
Right.
And I didn't do my due diligence.
Right.
And she just broke it down. And then Titus backed her up. And Titus,
good.
Titus, he sent her a tweet the next day, something like, I love you. Next time, call me. I'll help you out with it.
That's cute.
What she did right is she didn't double down.
She got in front of it too.
Get busted. Right. A lot of these people get busted for something and then they double down.
Yep. No home training, no media training. So yeah, it's nice to know that some people can simply just say, hey, you know what? Not a good look. Y'all are right. My bad. Let me do better for you next time. Because that's really all it takes.
Right.
Truly.
Right. And it was funny because I was talking to someone the other day and I was like, okay, I'm ready to see what Titus is if he's going to say something.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so we'll know if this worked and she's actually a decent person.
If this all tracks, right.
Titus says something to back her up because they're not on the same show anymore. He doesn't have to do that.
Right. Which is nice to see because, so many times we hear horror stories about how like the main star was a monster on and off camera and how sometimes that behavior would check, but because they would have starred, no one ever said anything. So that was nice to see that, okay, she really was like, the cool girl around town.
And also, I mean, she was, I see Tina Fey as if you're involved in a Tina Fey project, Tina Fey definitely has diverse projects, and
yes,
she's.
You know what? Speaking of, my friend just sent me one of my Facebook memories. I ran into her one day on the street.
Is it you and Tina Fey?
Yeah, waiting for Billie Eilish at the time.
Oh, that's funny.
That's funny.
Me and Tina Fey waiting for Billie Eilish.
Basically.
But like Tina Fey's projects are always diverse. They're always, female centric,
conscious. Yeah.
So I wouldn't think that if she was bigoted that she would be able to work well with Tina Fey.
I agree. And really quickly, before we wrap up that little portion, so also in chapter 7, The Ugly American, Shep said while he was in Buenos Aires, there was a political protest being held, and he said like the locals told him like, you know, don't go there, it's very dangerous, because people were protesting because the government was like, you know, taking the people's resources and then rationing it back to them and all that things. And then he says, before he talks about that, he goes, I don't want to get political. He's like, but now I understand why people in all these countries will risk it all to come to America. And I like that because for once, a white person saying, I don't want to get political, this is actually something that's political. So I like that he's got the mind to really have the conversation better than probably like the average person. So I really appreciate that. Like for once, someone says it. Yes, this is political. Like, good job.
And speaking of the politics, he in I think the cancel culture chapter broke down the left and the right and the mod, and he broke it down really well.
Mm-hmm.
And so my takeaway was that he is more liberal than I thought he was.
He's a smart man. Like, he's generally a smart man. And I enjoyed that.
You know, and like he is an advocate for civil rights, and his parents brought him up, you know, with knowledge of civil rights and things. But at the same time, he didn't go into it's not racist here in the South. It's not. No, he was like, there are racist
I
people.
realize where I am. I know where I
people.
grew up. Yeah, like he's very as aware as he can be about things. He's not 100% aware. I'd say he's about like a good like 87, maybe even 90% there with his awareness.
And I've looked at his tweets and stuff, and he will like go toe to toe with like a Trumper.
When he's bored, he's like, he's like, when I'm bored, he's like, I'll hop on the internet and, you know, duke it out a few rounds with some people who think they're right or like they think they know it all.
And actually, you know, the funny thing is his description of like progressives. I actually was like, oh, this is pretty accurate. Yeah. And then he gave his description of Trumpers, and I was like, oh, that's pretty accurate too.
Yeah.
So
he's got an idea. And the last thing from 7 I want to touch on is his experiences with the foreign exchange students. So the two that stuck out in my mind was that the crush that he had on the 17-year-old Brazilian girl when he was 13, Fabia. He's like, you know, I thought she was the best thing ever. He's like, I couldn't speak a word of Spanish, but, you know, I hung on to her every word. She was my babysitter. He's like, and then I thought I had my shot, but then, you know, her 19-year-old boyfriend Bruno came over, and he goes, he had the most chest hair I ever seen. He was a well-groomed Sasquatch, which I found like really funny. And then the second one was when he had Christian, that guy from Sweden, and he's like, I thought I was gonna have like an older brother, but he's like, but then it turns out like, you know, we were like, you know, having World War VI in the house, and he said that what do you call it? He's like, after he left, he came back to visit and it was fine. And he's like, you know, he really was like an older brother. And he says, you fight like hell, but then it's good, you know, after enough time passes. And that brings me to current day, A Place of Family Karma, to the Vishal and Dylan of it all, saying like, you know, how he felt that like, you know, he needs to teach Dylan a lesson, like the way his older brother taught him a lesson. So reading that made me think of that. And what do you think?
Vishal was not fucking around. Vishal was not. Vishal was ready.
Yeah, he's like, I'm gonna smack your face into the ground. Are you serious? Yes, very serious.
And the thing is about that, and everybody, we're talking about family karma. The thing about that, I was surprised how everybody got like butt hurt. Like everybody, like all the friends were like, "Oh my god, I can't believe he threatened to hit him." Like it was, wow, really nice. Like it really blew them away that someone threatened to pop someone. They didn't know how to handle it.
Right. Well, they all kept saying like, we're brown kids, we're Indian, we're nerds, we don't do this. And it's funny
Right.
because I was for a while, well, not a while, it's only been a week. So let's say for a few days, I was like, well, talk shit, get hit, I guess, question mark. But then I talked to our good friends from the Reality Is pod. I talked to Noor, and she says, like,
Oh, I love them.
we love them. She says culturally, like, watching that was like upsetting for her because she said, women,
Really?
yeah, she said like women in that culture, they get the brunt of everything, like they're looked on harder, they're held to a higher standard, exploitation. And she's like, you got boys like Vishal who don't have to do anything, their mothers give them every pass in the world, kind of caught on coasting through life. So she was like, anyone who's like, like kind of like rooting for him, she's like, don't, because she's like, he's like a big baby, he's got some issues he needs to work out, and we should not be supporting him right now in this little show he's putting on for us. And I didn't think about it that way. I'm like, you know what? It's true. Women always do get it harder. So I can imagine how much harder culturally, in certain cultures it can be. And it just gave me another perspective to think about.
Okay, I've got to rethink some things because I was on Team Vishal.
Talk to them. Send them a DM and they will break it down for you. I'm giving a very poorly paraphrased version, but no, like she really broke it down for me. I'm like, you know what? You're right. It's very man-child. It's actually giving me like, Jax Taylor never growing up, giving me like, Kyle in his earlier seasons. Yeah, like getting away with everything, everything being, for sure, it's okay. Like, no. Meanwhile, it's like you need to actually grow up. And maybe, if you did, maybe you'd still be in your engagement, maybe you'd be married by now, and like maybe you'd be moving ahead. Right. But when you've been coasted in college your whole life, you get this little, version of a man that's not really all that man.
That, I need to rethink that. Oh my God. The time has flown by.
Yes.
It's time for us to go. But before we go, what was your main takeaway from this book, and would you recommend it?
I like Shep, and if you like Shep, read the book.
Okay.
That's it.
So my takeaway from it was, like I said, I had a complicated relationship with it because I'd be reading something and like disliking it and like disliking his opinion, and then he'd say something and I'd go, oh wow, that wasn't so bad.
It's the honesty for me, because whether it's good or bad, it's honest. It's him. Like, this is Shep. It's not him trying to be someone else. It's not him, using his, PR glasses. Like, whatever it is, good, bad, it's Shep. And I respect that a lot.
And you do leave, there's some books that I read, Erica Jane's book, where you read this book and
Jane.
you start the book knowing nothing about them, and you end the book knowing nothing about them, and it's all surface. Whereas with this book, I actually left knowing more about him, and knowing his thought processes with things, and knowing why he thinks the way he thinks. And so for me, the next time I watch the show, it's actually going to make more sense. Like when he does stuff, I'll be able to look and see, oh, this tracks because this is what he said in his book, or, oh, well, that's not. So yeah, I left with a sense of knowing him better. Yes. So if you are a Southern Charm, but I do think if you're not a Southern Charm fan and you read it, you're really not, it might not do much for you. But if you are a Southern Charm fan,
or even a Shep
you'll
fan,
like it.
Yeah.
Or a Shep fan. Like if you're a Shep fan or a Southern Charm fan, you'll like the book. And P.S., I did finish the book, and I left the book liking him. I left the book thinking, well, you know what? We would probably get along if we met.
Yeah. And you know what? Last thing I'll say on all of this, and this will probably really put the nail in the coffin for me with this audience. But after reading the book, as you know, a certain bracket came about, and I liked him so much, I probably voted for him when I shouldn't have.
No, you did not. No, Semaj.
Thank you. You can follow me on
didn't.
Instagram at Semaj Gets Cancelled or Semaj with an H, and on Twitter at Semaj XCX. Celeste, you are the best. I love you so much. Thank you.
Oh, Semaj, I still love you, even though I just found that.
Subscribe to Reality Reading Rainbow. Follow Les on Instagram at Les Kirkendall Barrett. Follow him on Clubhouse at Les Kirkendall Barrett. And listen to him, not
Semaj.
me.
Semaj, and hey, and you just basically, I can say words. Oh, and then one more thing, if you want to throw a couple of bucks to my Patreon, go to Patreon, The Reality Reading Rainbow at patreon.com.
Subscribe to his
Semaj,
Patreon so you can suffer fools like me every week.
But no, you know what though? Every opinion here is welcome. Seriously, every opinion here is welcome. That's the joy of doing this show, and that's that's what I like about different, people with different opinions and different Bravo fans. It's like, hey, there's an opinion for all of us.
Yes.
And listen, you are welcome back here anytime.
Oh, thank you.
Anytime. And what else? I think you said how to find you, correct?
Yes.
Did you tell us that? Okay.
I did. Yep.
Well, and then you did my closing too. So
I had to clean up
until next time. And until next time, everybody, keep reading. Bye.